Yeah, the Elbridge. And she is also on the editorial committee of At Right Angles, a magazine which we bring out. So, as usual, I'm armed with many copies. If anyone wants to pick up a copy, please do so. I'll give the floor over to Jana.
Honor and a pleasure to be here, and as you all know, you might have seen the title before and read the abstract. So the title is Technology and Mathematics Education Issues and Challenges. I moved to the college in 2009, but before that I taught in school for about 13 years. So this is a sort of, and I have always been interested in the use of various kinds of tools for teaching mathematics. And I used to teach students from class 9 to class 12. So a lot of things that I tried throughout my years as a school teacher, I've tried to link it up with what is happening world over in mathematics education. And I hope there will be discussion after this. So the outline of the talk will be as follows, that first I will very briefly touch upon technology and learning theories and discuss the goals of mathematics education and what are the challenges of school mathematics education using the backdrop of the senior secondary mathematics education as a backdrop, and the role of technology in mathematics learning. So what are the pedagogical affordances given by many of these tools, and then briefly describe some of the studies which I did and their results, and finally conclude with the implication for curriculum and teacher preparation. So last decade particularly has seen a shift of paradigm in how the learning process is viewed. Learning is viewed as a natural process. It is a natural tendency of the brain to learn, although not everybody learns in the same way. It's a social process, as Vygotsky said, that students learn very well when they interact with their peers and elders and teachers. Learning has to be an active process where the learner is actively engaged. We know all these theories and we've read about them. Learning may be linear or non-linear. So the idea that when we learn something it has to be in a set of sequential steps is not always true. So cognitive theories say that the knowledge structures are stored in the memory in the form of cognitive maps, and students are always negotiating and extending these maps. But learning has to be integrative and contextualized, and it has to be based on students' abilities, interest and culture. That is the latest view about learning, and that there has to be a shift from the teacher-centric, that is the didactic, to the student-centric, that is the interactive. So technology has actually brought about a change in all aspects of our lives. And particularly, it has or is bringing about a change in our expectations of what our students should learn. In a technological society, students will have to learn to navigate through large amounts of information, analyze and make decisions, master new knowledge domains. They will need to be lifelong learners, collaborating with others in accomplishing various kinds of tasks. But the biggest challenge facing education systems today is that technology itself is continuously evolving. So how do we transform our curriculum and teaching learning process to provide students with the skills so that they can keep up with this technology and they can still work effectively in this dynamic, information rich, continuously evolving environment? The prominent learning theories are based on the assumption that learners are active agents purposefully seeking and constructing knowledge within a meaningful context. And the sociocultural theory says that learners should be provided with socially rich environments in which they can explore knowledge domains with their students, teachers and outside experts. So can information and communication technologies be used to support the learning environment by providing the tools for discourse, discussion, collaboration and problem solving? And the constructivists say that learning is constructed and not transmitted, and that learners need to play an active role. So to foster the construction of mathematical knowledge, the learning environment needs to provide opportunities to visualize, question, explore, discover. And for all these modes of learning, I feel that technology, if properly used, can be a great enabler. Now coming to mathematics education, I mean, we all as educators or teachers have often thought about what are the goals of mathematics education. And quoting from the position paper on the teaching of mathematics of the National Curriculum Framework, it says that simply stated there is one main goal, mathematization of the child's thought processes. And Hans Freudenthal has said that mathematics is after all a human activity and the pupil himself should reinvent mathematics. During this process, the learner is engaged in an activity where experience is described, organized and interpreted by mathematical means. And he calls this mathematizing. Of course, the school of the realistic mathematics education talked about different kinds of mathematizing, but now is not the time to get into that. But he felt that we should never teach students anything that they can invent or discover for themselves. They can discover for themselves. So how do we create that ambience? And the NCF document also goes on to say that there could be a narrow aim of mathematics, goal of mathematics education and a higher aim. And the narrow aim would be if the focus is to turn out employable adults who would contribute to society. If that is the aim, then the focus would be simply on teaching of numeracy, which our upper primary curriculum is largely taking care of. But mathematics, understanding and learning mathematics empowers us with a certain kind of thinking, with an approach to problem solving. And if that is the skill, if that is the focus of mathematics education, then the aim should be to develop the inner resources of the child, the processes of logical reasoning, handling abstractions, but more importantly, as the document, quoting from the document, the right approach to problem solving. So it says the school mathematics needs to be activity oriented, the mathematics should be accessible to all and affordable by all. There should be relevance because most of the time students do not know, very often do not know that why they are studying what they are studying. And teachers should be motivated to facilitate the learning through a variety of pedagogical techniques. And then it says a very important thing that the content, our school mathematics curriculum has taken care of the content of mathematics, there's nothing wrong with that. But what is missing in the transaction of that content is the processes which are important for learning mathematics, such as estimation, approximation, I'm not reading out all of them, use of patterns, visualization, reasoning and proof. Now if these are the processes that we need to focus on, then can technology help there? That is what I am going to focus on. But of course the NCF document had a big impact perhaps on the elementary curriculum, but it probably did not significantly impact the senior secondary curriculum. We all know that it's the school leaving examinations at the end of class 12 is a high stakes examination and it determines the student's future, and the student has already chosen between 3 streams. And the NCF document said this is the launching pad actually from which the student is guided towards career choices. And given that this is such a high, and the high stakes examination is followed by still higher stake examinations which are the entrance examinations to various institutes. So mathematics teaching at this level is largely driven by preparation for those, these high stake examinations. And curriculum makers have always faced this problem between depth and breadth. So should there be a larger number, should there be few topics dealt with in more depth, or should there be a larger number of topics? And here perhaps the quote by William Thurston is applicable. The long range objectives of mathematics education would be better served if the tall shape of mathematics were de-emphasized by moving away from a standard sequence to a more diversified curriculum with more topics which start closer to the ground. But it also says that if breadth is chosen over depth, then the topic should at least be treated to the extent that the student gets to see the utility of those concepts in other topics in mathematics, or at least to other subject areas. Otherwise, there is no point in including a particular topic in the curriculum. And if we look at the topics, this is typically the breakup of class 11 and class 12. Topics of class 11 are more in number and they form prerequisites for the topics of class 12, but they are very rich in mathematical content. And if you see that calculus takes up almost 50% of the class 12 syllabus. So unfortunately the exam at the end of class 12 focuses on, the syllabus is from class 12. So the topics of class 11 are not tested. which are the ones which are really, and they tend to get sort of neglected in school teaching. And that does create gaps for later. Aspect of topics rather than applications are emphasized. So there are very few opportunities for visualization, exploration, discovery, and there is no use of technology. Even if there is any scope, and it is up to class 8 perhaps, but beyond that, generally in schools, in the large majority of schools, there is no use of technology. And when we talk of applications, maybe the real application, I am talking about the CBSE, and I am taking this example from the NCERT textbook. This is an application based question. It is taken up, this question has been there for the last 20 years in this chapter on maxima minima. And by the end of it, if you are teaching, you know which number question it is. It is a good question, it is an important question. But that doesn't mean that we need to revisit this question in the same way year after year. So it says that there is this rectangular sheet of these dimensions and you have to cut out squares from the corners, and this has to be folded to form an open box. So what should be the length of the square to be cut out so that the volume of the box is maximum? So here it's a very standard question. The student models the question by writing the volume function and then has to apply the second derivative test, very often not knowing why that particular test and what are its conceptual implications. Or sometimes the questions are based on, so that question would be typically for 6 marks worth, and this one, find the angle between these two straight lines, which is a direct application of a formula, would come for 2 marks. But there would be questions emphasis which require a substantial amount of manipulative skills, like these two. If you look at the second one, it runs into almost a full page if you really try to integrate root tan x. What is it that we want our students to learn? What are we testing? Is it the use of a trick? Is it learning, remembering the substitution? I mean, unless the student has done root tan x before, he cannot do root tan x, integrate root tan x. And what is the use? What are we trying to understand and test from giving this question? We need to ask ourselves these questions. So emphasis is on drill and practice and on learning tricks to solve questions. Getting exact answers is overemphasized. So the NCF also says we need to liberate school mathematics from the tyranny of the one right answer found by applying the one algorithm taught. And then as you read the document, the proportion spent on elementary mathematics is a lot more, and there is very little on senior secondary stage. But it does say that mathematical modeling which challenges the student's conceptual understanding should be included into the curriculum. After this, chapters appeared in textbooks of 9th to 12th as appendix on mathematical modeling. There were, if you look at the textbooks, you will find. But they were just essentially the same content of other chapters put in a little different way. But they were not really models. I mean, they could have been models from traffic flow or cryptography or optimization or genetics, which are accessible to school students, but probably we need to look at these things. So students ask, why do we need to study this? And then the use of real world applications and modeling then can create that context where they can apply the mathematical theory that they are learning in the topic. And this will motivate not only students, it will really motivate teachers. So the students learn new mathematical content, and they also get to see the relevance of the mathematics that they are learning. Coming back to the question of the shift from content to processes. So my question is, how can technology help? I am not saying can technology help, it can, but how can it help? So what are the things we need to do? What are the kind of questions we need to ask? What are the explorations, technology enabled explorations we need to design to make this shift happen? Also, I am not saying that manipulative skills and procedures are not needed, they are very much needed. But that should not be the only focus. Now when we talk of procedural knowledge, and there is, the literature talks about conceptual knowledge and procedural knowledge, they are not really separate in that sense. We need to look at them we need to look at a blend of the two. Both are important. And the procedures did not just fall out of the sky. I mean, they are based on the concepts. So, but very often that link is lost when the mathematics is being taught in the classroom. So the research has shown that technology can be a catalyst for realizing the goals of what we stated, the goals of mathematics education. It supports a constructivist approach. So if rightly designed, a technology-enabled exploration can engage the learner to figure out things, to see patterns, to discover patterns, to see invariant properties, to find counterexamples. It can also be a scaffolding tool. So if there are students who are struggling with certain, let's say, a specifically computational aspect, then maybe the tool can take over that aspect for some time and the student focuses on concepts. And maybe, but the ultimate aim is to wean away the technology tool and the student should be able to do both, should be able to do the problem solving on her own. It lightens technical work and reduces cognitive load. I'll try and cite some examples later. And because many of these tools can give a graphic, numeric and symbolic representation of concepts, it leads to multi-representational understanding. It could lead to multi-representational understanding of concepts. And also access to higher level mathematics, which I will again highlight through an example. But most importantly, I think the process of mathematization, mathematical modeling, or at least exploring well-known mathematical models can easily be done if you design the right kind of technology explorations. The technology for mathematics instruction can broadly be categorized into these. I don't know, is it very clear? Not very clear, I think that. It's slightly, yeah. The first is dynamic geometry software. The ones marked in blue are actually the open source softwares like GeoGebra. Now it has a version 5.0 beta version which can do 3D graphing also. Cinderella, Dr. Geo, Geometric Explorer. These are the open source, and Geometry, Sketchpad and Cabri are also what comes under dynamic geometry software. Again, I'll highlight later. Computer algebra systems are a very powerful class of software. Some of the popular ones are Mathematica, Maple, MATLAB, Derive. Maxima is open source. Spreadsheets, there are others, but I have only written MS Excel here. And handheld technology, the graphics calculators, some of them are enabled by some dynamic geometry and CAS features, and they come under a class of calculators known as algebraic calculators. They can do symbolic manipulation. These are some of the tools available. Now the thing is that when do you use which tool, how, when, what suits. Now this also is, of course you can design modules where there is a person who is creating the resource decides that perhaps, or an expert decides that perhaps this is the tool which is useful for this exploration. That can be done. But by and large, I do not think the features of the tool are that essential or that important. It is how you design, how the student really goes about exploring and discovering the problem. That process is more important. Of course, one could pick any of these dynamic geometry softwares. They would have slight variations in their features. That doesn't matter. But as long as you get the dynamic geometry environment, that is what matters. So my personal experience has been that graphics calculators, they bring the visualization right onto the palm of the hand because they are like a proper size of a calculator. If you don't have infrastructure for all other softwares, you need a computer lab. If the school doesn't have that kind of facility, you can easily carry a set of 30 or 40 graphics calculators to the class. They are appropriate for large classrooms. You can explore functions graphically, numerically, symbolically. You can design simple mathematical modeling activities. Statistical inference simulation are also possible on handhelds. Computer algebra systems are powerful, and the power is more of their three-dimensional graphing. But they would probably, for school use, I would say they are limited. Maybe a smaller fraction of the students could be using this. And this is more appropriate for problems which are explored over a larger period of time. For example, if you look at visualizing solutions of differential equations. Or if I did one experiment with the class 12 students where they explored Fourier series and Gibbs phenomenon. This was spread over 3 months. So there, Mathematica was the tool used there. Spreadsheets also have limited use, but they are useful as far as simulating experiments are concerned. Some of these are very interesting problems. They would really excite students, like the birthday paradox or the Monty Hall problem or the game of craps, and there are numerous others. Maybe I'll highlight one of them later. Simple and multiple regression. Now, multiple regression is not done in the school level, but simple regression can be done. Statistical inference, exploring chaotic behavior of functions and so on. These things become accessible to school at the school level if you have these tools. Now, coming to those processes of learning mathematics. Now, these tools allow you to approach the problem numerically. Now, exactness is overemphasized in our school mathematics. So, when we say solve, we want the exact answer. But should we say that should solve mean determine the solution with a prescribed degree of accuracy? So, when the question is this, when will your money triple in value at 6% interest compounded annually? So, what equation would you arrive at? Yeah, so if you do that, what is the equation? The student would apply that formula, yes. So, what equation would you arrive at? Anybody? When would your money triple in value? At 6%? Yeah, it should be equal to 3. So, what the equation becomes? 1 plus r upon 100, so that is 1 plus 6 upon 100. So, it becomes 1.06 raised to the power n is equal to 3. It has a triple in value, right? So, the equation they would come up after applying the formula is 1.06 raised to the power n is equal to 3. So, you have to find n. So, what do? They use log. Okay, that's fine. I'm not saying it's not important to use log. But if you have a tool like this, you can use a guess, check and improve strategy. So, you can guess what could be, so estimation, guess a value of n, and then try to narrow down to the right answer, get as close as possible to the right answer. I'll show it in the next slide. But an equation of this kind is not there in the school text actually. So, x plus 2 raised to the power x equal to 7, but these can be explored. So, I was talking about the first one. Of course, you need to use log tables and log 3 upon log 1.06. But what meaning does this convey to the student? Answer is log 3 upon log 1.06, that's it. You have to use the table, yes. And there is a long process involved, long time will be spent in figuring out what is x. But if you use this, these are screenshots of the graphics calculator. So, various powers of, these students were doing, various powers of x were inserted. So, 15, then 18, 20 was 3.2. So, they have to reach 3. So, finally narrow down. So, then it must be between 18 and 20. So, 18.5 and 18.85, and then you sort of try and arrive at the solution. Sorry? You are approaching the problem numerically and the student is getting a sense of the actual answer, 18 point. So, you are approaching the problem numerically and so for example, this is a graphics calculator, this is a soft version of that. I'll just have to break it into two, I'm sorry, this is not fitting into the screen. So, the other equation was x plus 2 raised to the power x equal to 7, what is solve for x basically. So, again if you want to approach it numerically, what you could do is, you could go to a particular mode of the calculator and so I am looking at x plus 2 raised to the power x. Now, what would the value of x be? Can you roughly tell? Between 2 and 3. So, we go to setting the values. So, we say start at 2, go up to 3. So, I am just generating nothing but a simple table of values and putting a step size, say 0.1. So, ignore the last column because it was written 7 there. So now where should I go? What should I? Can you see the screen? So it has to be equal to 7. So now the answer is between what? X should be between what and what? 2.2 and 2.3. So I exit. I go back to that. So what should I enter now? I should start at 2.2, end with 2.3 and reduce the step size, let's say to 0.01. Of course, being a handheld, it does have some limitations and in terms of calculations, but let's just see what it does. So now, between 2.24 and 2.25, so you can, at least the student can attempt this equation, whereas in the regular textbook, this you could not deal with these equations if you did not, at this stage, it is not possible to solve it analytically. So this was one example where I like to show that. So the guess, check and improve strategy is an important strategy and you can approach problems numerically. Now coming to calculus and this is again a textbook problem, solve the first inequality. Now what I want to ask you is what is important for solving this problem. Now this problem can have, you can actually divide it into two aspects. One is the what paper pencil method is required to solve this, the first one. Sorry? The first one. We want to solve the inequality. Typically in a traditional classroom, what is expected of the student? Factorize it. There will be 3 linear factors. So they must know how to factorize the cubic. Do you as a teacher feel that this is an important paper pencil task? Because the tool can factorize. Yes, tool can factorize. But do you as a teacher think that it is important for the student to factorize by hand? Sorry? No, forget that, don't get it. You are a teacher. Do you think it's important for the student? What do you think?
But why or why not would be my question. Why is it important to factorize it? Why not?
See, without factorizing, you can't arrive at, say, find out the intervals where it would be satisfied, the inequation. But the tool can factorize it. So factorization has to be done. But is it important to do it by hand? If the tool is there, would you want the students to do it by hand? We can have a divided opinion, that's no problem.
When he wants to do an MBA afterwards, when he writes a CAD,
I don't know about that. But I think it's a very important paper pencil skill. Yes, you have to know certain, some skills you just cannot do away with no matter what technology you have. That's the point I'm trying to make. It is important and you will find the 3 linear factors and I chose the inequality that way. It's x minus 1 into x minus 2 into x minus 3 less than 0. Okay, so you can factorize it.
If you reach this level though, haven't you already done factorization? And yes, the kids do know factorization.
Yes.
So we can cut to the bone and really roll out the...
No. Yes, I agree. I'm just trying to ask you that, so where is the technology contributing here? The technology can factorize, but I am saying use your discretion. Do not allow the students to use the technology to factorize because factorization is an important skill. But what do we do? What do we tell them after that? Okay, 1, divide your number line. I don't have a board here. 1, 2, 3, make these loops. Is that right? Oh, okay. So make these loops and plus minus, we do some technique and tell them to find out the intervals where this inequality would be satisfied. But I don't think that gives the visual insight as to why.
Not only that, I think that when they finish factorizing, they feel that they've done the major chunk of the problem. So they're not at all interested in
Finding out the further.
Yes.
Yes, I agree.
So we skip that factorization and let, as Jyoti said, if we let the machine handle that, then we can focus on the important part of the problem.
Okay, so that's what I'm saying. The tool allows you to use different pedagogical methods. One teacher may feel that yes, they know quadratic factorization, but I feel it's important to also factorize some cubics. That skill is also important. And figure out how you get those factors. 1, 2, 3, why are the, that's important because later on it leads to something else in higher mathematics. You have to look at the factors of minus 6. and see which one satisfies, and that you can work it out. But now after you have done that, you just graph this in. Just graph the equation, not even the inequality, just graph the cubic function. As a function you graph it. And then that itself picture will tell you where the inequality is satisfied. So let me show you. Again, just to save time, I can do it on a direct graphic calculator, but these are the graphic calculator screenshots. Now this is the cubic function, the first one. Now, can you say which are the intervals in which this is satisfied? Because this is the number line, x-axis. This is 0, this is 1, this is 2, this is 3. So which are the intervals where it was less than 0, right? So wherever the graph is below the x-axis. So it would be minus infinity to 1 or 2 to 3. These are the intervals. Now this takes a lot of paper pencil time is spent, lot of classroom time is spent in figuring that out. Whereas the technology gives you an immediate feedback. So if you want, you can decide that I think it's important for my students to factorize this cubic, but after that let them use the tool to graph the function and figure out which are the intervals where this inequality is satisfied. Again, if you look at limits, now limits they need to, can we address the questions or should we make it interactive? I am okay, I mean I just have a lot of material to cover, so yeah, please we'll take that.
Yeah, might have a question.
Yeah.
There's just one thought, okay?
Right.
1, 2, 3, it is 0. So it has to cross at these points. Where will a child place these things? This thing, just this line of thought, right? At 1, 2 and 3.
That has happened before because this is typically class 11 and 12. They've already done that before. And
no, means I want to solve, just find out that there is an inequality. I know
so that also you can do because you are graphing the function and wherever it cuts the x-axis.
No, I don't want to see this. I'm just saying that for the random, I just saw the question. I know that it's a curve. And I know the moment I factorized it, I know that it has to cross 0 at 1, 2 and 3. So where will I start thinking on these lines if I see this graph directly?
If you see the graph directly, one, you will get to know what are the linear factors themselves. You will get to know x minus 1, x minus 2, x minus 3 because that's where the graph is cutting the x-axis. So you will get to know the linear factors, but it's giving you a visual meaning because if the inequality was greater than 0, then you would have looked at the other intervals. So it's giving you that visual picture, no, which doesn't directly happen when you are teaching in the traditional classroom. We'll just come back to that, maybe I'll just... Now look at this for example, limit sin 1 upon x as x tends to 0. So the limit doesn't exist. So then there are techniques taught to the students to work out left hand, right hand limit and other things and use other techniques. But here if you zoom in at the origin, you keep zooming in, that means you are coming closer and closer to 0 from both the sides. You see that the oscillations simply do not. So the function sin 1 by x is not approaching any fixed value at all. So that also is another way of, another situation where the limit doesn't exist. Again coming, because limits takes a lot of time to do. Now this is another typical paper pencil method is going to be, this question is posed in the textbook. The numerator we have x cube minus 3x minus 2 and denominator we have x square minus 4 and limit x approaching 2. Now in a tool like this, which is a handheld tool, it has a dual screen feature. It's called the class pad, the Casio class pad. Here you can enter the function and you can use a stylus and drag the function and graph it. Now the moment you graph it and you can trace a cursor along the graph and as x approaches 2 on either side, what value does the function approach? That you can see at least. But also it says that there is an error at 2, that means the function is not defined at x equal to 2. So if you look at the table of values, you can see you can keep reducing the step size like I was showing you and get closer and closer to 2. So you can at least see the left hand limit and the right hand limit, they are approaching the same value. Now these things are done by paper and pencil, but you can actually, and you can address a larger number of problems. And if you see this, this tool also has a symbolic manipulation feature. So direct limit command can also be used to check the answer. So if you use the limit command, You may choose not to use it. It has a factor command and things like that, but not all graphic calculators have it. This is enabled by CAS, so it has it. So, so this could be a way that you can approach the limits graphically, symbolically and numerically. Now coming back to that question which, so there was a little intervention that I had done. There were a lot of students who struggled with this particular topic where the questions are where they are required to use in calculus the second derivative test to find out what is the maximum or minimum, in this case the volume of the box has to be maximum. They have to optimize basically. Now in this case, so what they do, they know that they have to write a function, find its derivative and equate it to 0 and you get the critical points. And those at those values of x there would be a maximum or minimum value. They know that theoretically and they apply that and then they go on to the second derivative. But many people struggle because solving that f dash x equal to 0 itself is a problem. Because, so again in this tool, now note that if this problem is given, the student has to write the function. Now what would be the volume of the box? You have a tin of dimension 15 centimeter by 8 and you are cutting out x, squares of length x. So when you fold on both sides you will have 15 minus 2x, 8 minus 2x and the height would be x. So volume function clearly has to be x. So they have to figure this out themselves. I mean the tool is not going to do anything unless you tell it to do. So you input the function and then you say differentiate it with respect to x and solve. The tool gives you two answers, 6 and 5 upon 3. Again the student has to, is 6 possible? Which one is one of them not possible? Because 6, the width of the paper itself is 8 centimeters, you can't cut out a square of 6, so you ignore, you reject that. The other one is possible. And then you immediately draw a graph. See, by now the students are getting a feel for the shape of cubic functions because they very frequently encounter cubic functions. And so you immediately graph the volume function and then you can see that somewhere where the curve is going up, there is a turning point, that would be 5 upon 3. Then I asked them that don't worry about the calculation part, let the calculator do all the calculations. You just apply the test and understand what is happening. So they did the calculator because it can do the symbol. This is a CAS calculator, computer algebra system, means it can do all the calculations, the symbolic manipulation provided you give the right commands. And then they found the second derivative and inserted the value of x and checked that it is negative. Okay, they did all that. So they applied the second derivative test and found that the maximum volume would be 90.74 centimeter cube. Then we said graph it only, enlarge it to the entire screen because we are not interested in 6, we are only looking at one solution 5 by 3. And then at the bottom, so as you trace along the curve using a cursor, if you trace along the curve, at the point of maxima it is giving the x value as 1.66 and the volume also it is showing. But how is it related to the derivative function? So when you graph the derivative, now because the original function is a quadratic, the derivative is cubic, derivative is a quadratic function and it is a parabola. Where does it cut the x-axis? Because we said you have to do v dash x equal to 0. So wherever it cuts the x-axis are the critical points. So when it cuts the x-axis at two places, we are not looking at this part, so we are looking at this part. And wherever it cuts the x-axis, I said look, observe the original function carefully, there is a turning point. So as the derivative is changing from being positive to negative, the original function is changing from an increasing to a decreasing function. So there is a turning point there at the corresponding value of x, which is the critical point. In this case it happens to be 1.66. So this link between the derivative function and the original function, which is a very important one. You can do it by pen and I am not saying you can't draw a neat graph and do it perhaps, but you can't explore this for 5 or 6 or 10 problems. So they did this for this kind of graphing and for 5 problems, and after that they were motivated to look at the other problems. They said now we understand why we needed to apply the test in the first place and therefore we are willing to do, I mean they were willing to sort of do few more problems. Of course, I told them that in the examination you can't use this tool. So you must ultimately, you have to be able to solve it. But at least there was a visual understanding of the. Also I feel that when we teach, we say we look at the integral as a limit of the sum of the rectangles. And maybe I'll just quickly show you how this is done. So GeoGebra is a dynamic geometry software. So if you open a GeoGebra screen, is there a problem with the, is it too intense? Because it's very clear on my this thing, but I can't see the algebra view that.
You have the grids.
No, I'm saying that it's too bright. So many things are not visible on the screen actually. Where this is a dynamic, so basically this is the geometry screen, and then this is an algebra view, the other side. And I could enter a function, for example, so when you enter the function in the input bar, you get the graph. And now I'm going to, basically I want to find the area under this curve from one point to the other. And in class it's a little difficult. So here I am emphasizing on the fact that you can even just use it as a demonstration tool. So select 2 points, let's say -1, 0 and 3, 0. So whenever you are doing something, it appears on the algebra view as well. It is defining, and it tells you some objects are free and some objects are dependent. Even that leads to an interesting discussion in the class as to which ones are free, especially in a geometry construction, which ones are the free objects and which one are the dependent objects. Okay. Now I bring in a slider, which is a very well known feature of many tools where you like to do some simple animations. Maybe I'll take, I insert a slider for a particular variable n whose value will range from 1 to 50 with an increment of 1. So the slider appears here. And now I want to divide this interval -1 to 3 on the x-axis into intervals of, into n rectangles, okay, where n can be varied. So I can have just one rectangle between these two, I can have 2, I can have 100, I can have 500. So I define what is called the lower sum. So I am doing the lower rectangles, and I am saying find the lower sum of the function fx as for the x coordinates a and b of the points a and b. And when I do this, so I get one rectangle between -1 and 3, and maybe we can also change the object properties by, you can make it more, let's choose a dark color. And now, so there is only one rectangle approximating the area under the curve, which is very poor approximation. But as you increase the number of rectangles, we see that the lower sum, which is approximating the area under the curve, is going from, and up to 50 it is about 8.4. So at least as a demonstration tool, it is a simple animation. It took me 1 minute to do that. Now I can also do, I ask them, I give them a task. Now look at the upper rectangles. So you want to approximate the area under the curve from the above the curve. So now we have the similar command. I'll just take a, I could have just done it, but it would have been less convincing if I had just shown it to you as a clip. Now the upper rectangles are light, like the lighter one. Now when it's an upper rectangle, it is right here, it is way above the area under the curve, way more than the area under the curve. Now I approximate. So as I go on increasing the number of rectangles, the upper sums approaches from the above, the lower sums approaches from below, and by the end of 50 rectangles it is not equal but close. And then I can simply go to the object properties of n and say now I want 200 rectangles, not 50. So slider should vary from 1 to 200. And now let's see. So by the time it's 200, the two are quite close, closer than they were. So this kind of demonstration is not possible to do it by drawing, and it's simple, anybody can use it and even students can explore. So I feel this is a very useful feature of the, and this is just a static picture of that. So you can illustrate mathematical ideas and applications in powerful geometric settings. But the bigger question which comes after this is that our traditional questions, so technology cannot fit into the curriculum directly as it were as the curriculum as it stands today. We need to ask different kind of questions if we want to really assess their learning. Maybe different kinds of questions. I already discussed the first one. Now in inequalities, it's very common in the textbook to ask that what is the common region to these following inequalities. Maybe we could ask the reverse, that given this picture, what inequalities would lead to this shaded region? Now please tell me what you feel about question number 2. Do you think it is a good question? Because what thinking skills will be required for the student? The student has to have a sufficient, both are parabolas, and the student has to have sufficient knowledge of the properties of quadratic functions to be able to figure out. So he has to manipulate, he has to play around, he will do hit and trial for some time before she figures out that what are the inequalities and what would lead to this shaded region. So I am not getting into the discussion of the solution, but this is an important question. One could say that one does not need technology to ask this question perhaps, but if you have the tool, they can do some hit and trial work, and it will be much faster than in a simple paper pencil. I would like to ask the third question to the audience. Which is more likely, getting exactly 5 heads and 5 tails in 10 tosses of a coin, or 50 heads and 50 tails in 100 tosses of a coin? Any guess? It's okay. Sorry? Same. How many takers for same? Okay. Sneha? Same. Anyone else? Which is more likely? I mean, in which is the probability higher? Getting exactly 5 heads in 10 tosses or 50 heads in 100 tosses? So what kind of a process is it when I flip a coin? A Bernoulli process. It's called a Bernoulli trial, right? So
Intuitively, I would say the second, but I don't know mathematical.
the second one, the natural answer is to say the second one is more likely. So it is more. Let's just ask the tool to answer that question. And though I can use the graphics to do this, because graphics also has a statistical inference, but maybe I'll go to the spreadsheet. Okay, it's a binomial. Sorry?
If you allow some physics thought, it's definitely the second. Because the error is much less in the second than it will be in the first. Because the first will be, the error could be 1 out of 10 and the second is only 1 out of 100.
I thought it was the first.
He says first. Which is more likely, the probability of occurrence if I toss a coin 10 times, or if I toss 10 coins simultaneously, there is a certain probability of getting exactly 5 heads. Similarly, if I toss 100 coins simultaneously, there is a certain probability of getting exactly 50 heads. Which is more? Which probability is more? So it's a binomial probability we have to calculate. So I'll just quickly ask Excel for the answer. So I'll use the binomial command. It's a binom dist. In the first case, I have how many? 5 successes, because I am saying getting heads is a success. So 5, and then there are 10 trials. Probability of getting a heads is half, and no, I don't want a cumulative. .25 for the which one? First one. So all I need to now do, drag this to the next cell and make it shall we? Much less, getting exactly 50 heads. Again it's, I can't see the grid anyway. Yes, it's far more likely to get exactly 5 heads in. Now let's look at what's the reason behind it? So it is NCR P raised to the power R Q raised to the power, it's a simple formula which students are doing at the class 11 level. Now when you are putting, so it becomes N is 10C5 and it is half raised to the power 10 in the first case. Second one, it becomes half raised to the power 100. It is 100C50, but the contribution of that is much less than, so it is more likely that. So questions which ask for reasoning could be perhaps included in the curriculum. A project based question, I like this a lot because it leads to an exploration of what is meant by a chaotic behavior, again of quadratic functions, the fourth one. So you have a recursive, it's a quadratic function but expressed in a recursive manner. Xn plus 1 is 3.3 xn 1 minus xn, and what you do is you start with an initial seed x naught. You put 0.1, you get x2, then you whatever is the value of x2 you put it in, you get x3 and so on. So you have a sequence of points, right? They are saying generate 30 of these values. You can't do this by hand, you have to use a tool for this. And then they are saying, okay, now if this coefficient was 3.3, make it 3.8 and see what is happening when you change. Now, and describe these situations as being chaotic or stable. So I will just come to that. Now in the first case, when the coefficient is 3.3, we see that if you generate a table of values of those points, they after a while they steady out and keep oscillating between two fixed values. And when you do a web plot, it very nicely moves to that square, the rectangular pattern, giving a very stable behavior. Whether you choose 0.1 as the initial x naught or whether you choose 0.7 or 0.8 between 0 and 1, it does not make much of a difference and it steadies out to the steady state behavior of the system is stable. In the second case, I took 0.2 as the initial seed, and if you make it 0.2, if you shift it to 0.21, you find a completely different behavior, and you will make a slight change in the initial seed and then it does not also stabilize. So it goes on oscillating, it goes back and forth. So the web plot for this is far more complicated and it is not reducing. So at least you can, and this is on a handheld calculator. So even a handheld tool can give insights which we do not expect to include in the curriculum without the technology. You can ask a question like this. Please read the fifth question. So if it is a sunny day today, the probability that it will rain tomorrow is 0.9. And if it is a rainy day today, then the probability of rain tomorrow is 0.3. And this person is saying that 7 out of every day is 8 days is sunny, regardless of whether today is sunny or rainy, it does not matter. In the long run, you take any bunch of any 8 days, you will find 7 out of those 8 days and you want to verify whether this is, she is making the right claim or not. Now this is a simple modeling problem where you need to use a transition matrix. So I say I have a 2 by 2 matrix, sunny, rainy, sunny, rainy. So if it is sunny, so the entries of this are, I could just maybe quickly show you. If I go to the matrix mode, I enter a 2 by 2 matrix, what will be the entries of this? 0.9, because the first entry is sunny to sunny, But below that will come what? This will be 0.1, because it means that if today is a sunny day, tomorrow being rainy probabilities, obviously the column sum has to add up to 1 because it is a probability vector. Then it tells us if it is rainy, then the probability tomorrow will be rainy is 0.3. So on top we will have 0.7. Now, so I have a matrix which gives the probability, the transition probabilities, and then I go to the state vector. What is it today? Suppose today is a sunny day. So I have two states, sunny or rainy. So if it is sunny, I put a 1 on top. If it is a rainy day, I put a 1 at the bottom. So we call it a state vector because it describes today's state. And I do a calculation now. So suppose I want to know what will happen after 2 days. If I square the transition matrix and multiply it with the state vector, you will get the state. So suppose I say I am entering, the first matrix was this, I am squaring this matrix and multiply it with the other matrix, which is the state matrix. So after 2 days, the chances are of it being a sunny or a rainy day is given by these two, and I can basically in the long run what is going to happen. So in the long, we can calculate the long run probabilities, and it comes to about if you just try it out, it will say maybe let's raise it to the power 10. I don't know if that will work. Let me see. Not very different from, but so we are saying in the long run the chances of a given day being sunny, the interpretation of this is 0.88 and being rainy is this. Is that 7 out of 8? So approximately. So she is right. So I mean, you can give this kind of simple questions. Of course, they must understand the mathematics behind the transition matrix, and you have to build up from Markov processes which you can't bring in the entire theory, but you can at least use. So matrices don't seem to be a very abstract thing to them when they use it as a tool to interpret and figure out things.
Also the thing about any given day being sunny, that day doesn't know how many days have gone by already.
Right.
So your statistics won't change. The numbers
Yes,
will come up
it is independent of the initial vector, yes.
So that's another.
Yes, yes, you can verify it, yes. So irrespective of what it is today, it doesn't matter, whatever probabilities I start with, it will eventually lead to that. So, see how much time do I have? I lost track of time actually. I think I should speed up. Okay. So now if you look at spreadsheets, there are many problems one could model using spreadsheets. These are some of the things I have done with students, and it works very well to do it on Excel. So exploring the Fibonacci sequence and golden ratio, for example, or exploring chaos, I just described a little bit of that. The birthday paradox, a very famous problem, which says that how big should be a group of people so that we are sure that there will be at least one match. The group size here is small, so or the Buffon's needle problem. Have you heard of this problem? Maybe I'll just. So the birthday paradox asks us how many people do you need in a group to ensure that at least 2 people have the same birthday? Yes, you said something, please. So the first reaction of students is usually 366, and that would be true. But the paradox is because in a much smaller group size, you actually get to see a match. And an article based on this is there in the At Right Angles, and how to explore it is using Excel. So I am not going to elaborate on this. But it's not just important to verify it. So if I simulate, so I can actually collect randomly 50 people, and you would find that in a group of 50 people, the chances of finding a common birthday is almost certain. Okay, in a group of 50 people. I can randomly collect 50 people, various groups of 50 people and verify it. But if you have to do it in the classroom, you can simulate it by randomly generating birthdays. So how does we, these are the commands which help you do that. For a birthday, what do you need? You need a month and a day. So 1 to 12, you randomly generate integers from 1 to 12. So if 3 turns up, it's March. And if in the day 1 to 31, so if, of course there might be impossible dates, but you ignore those simulations. But if 28, 3 and 28 comes up, it is 28th of March. So you can do that and you can generate 50 birthdays, sort the list, and you would easily see, and invariably there is a match. So maybe I'll just show you the already ready-made. This is already done simulation, and this simulation was done. So these are the months, these are the dates, and so we convert the birthday into a 3-digit number. Then we sort. Look at this list, for example. It is a sorted list. So can you see matches? That means when there is a match, the two numbers after sorting would occur together, isn't it? So these are 60 birthdays, a list of 60 birthdays, and they were converted into 3-digit number. What does 113 mean? 13th of January, 6th of February, and so on. Okay. So there is a match here. There are more matches. In fact, there are more. Every time you click on this sheet, a new simulation occurs. Now when I have clicked, a new set of 60 birthdays has got generated. Everything else gets updated, right? Now let me check in this list, because you might say I have already used that before. So let me right click, copy, come somewhere else. 25. Usually more than one is seen. So you can verify it, but that's not enough. It is important to discuss the probability and why it happens like this, and that takes class, that has been discussed in that article, so I would request, if you are interested, you can go through that. So there are many such problems which can be simulated. If you look at I will not get into the Monty Hall problem, because that also is been submitted for an article, which is a very popular problem. But maybe we can look at this, that there is a table which has a set of surface or a sheet of paper which has parallel lines, and we drop a needle of, so if the distance between the parallel lines is say 1 inch, then you take a needle of length 1 inch and you keep dropping it on the sheet of paper. What is the probability that a randomly thrown needle will touch or cross these lines? And this information can be used to estimate the value of pi. Now, what has a needle and a sheet of paper got to do with pi? But apparently it does. So if you throw a needle, it could fall in many ways, isn't it? It could fall this way. It could fall this way. The center of the needle is exactly placed. It could fall in any way. We can't predict. But we need to define needle throws. So how do we model the needle throw? For every needle throw, let's define two variables, two random variables. One which is the angle made by the needle with the acute angle made by the needle with the line, nearest line maybe, and the distance of the center of the needle from the nearest line. So if we do that, D lies between 0 and L by 2, and theta would lie between 0 and 90 degrees, as pi by 2. And so every needle throw, every time you throw a needle, in this rectangle, if you take a rectangle whose dimensions are, on the x axis you indicate 0 to pi by 2 for values of theta, on the y axis you denote 0 to half if it's 1 inch. Then every needle throw will be represented by a point in that an ordered pair. So every needle throw is essentially an ordered pair. Now what happens when the needle, so we want the probability of when the needle hits a line, hits means touches or crosses over. If it just about touches a line, then notice that D will be equal to half sine theta. For sine theta you can see, sine theta will be D upon half. So D is equal to half sine theta. When the needle crosses over, it is less than half sine theta, and when the needle does not touch, misses, then D will be greater than half sine theta. So I am interested in the first two cases vis-a-vis the total number of cases. So if I throw the needle 10,000 times, I need to count in how many such needle throws are the first two satisfied. Now if you look at the rectangle, 0 to pi by 2 on the x axis and 0 to half on the y axis, and if you graph half sine theta, so this is a graph like this. So the grey area is the number of hits actually, I mean the proportion of hits. So you can find this area if you know integration, basic integration. So area under this curve upon the total area. What is the total area of the rectangle? Pi by 2 into half. And area under the curve you can find out, right? Now when we do this, all this, the probability of a hit comes to about 0.63, that means 63%, 63.7% chance. Now the question is, maybe I'll just show you a Mathematica file which was generated. This is the computer algebra, it's a very powerful software, and I've written a simple routine which says needle throws, I generate random numbers. I have to randomize the throw of the needle. So theta has to be a value between 0 and pi by 2, and the d has to be value between 0 and half. So I randomly generate the numbers and I plot. I have only 100 throws in this diagram, so there are 100 dots. Let's see what happens when I increase to 1000 throws. Few more dots, but it's not likely to give you a very good approximation, is it? I mean, at the end of the day, I want this entire rectangle to be filled with dots so that I can say that the area under the curve approximates the actual proportion of hits. Let's make it 10,000. Now Excel can't do this, okay? It's practically getting dense. So the area under the red line would be the hits. So that's why we are saying that we can actually approximate it, okay? So, but this doesn't help me to count and actually estimate. The next program does that, where I just generate the two random numbers and I apply a counter, and every time the if condition checks, if d is less than or equal to half sine theta, then the hit gets incremented, else it doesn't. And then so if you see, if I run this program, the value of pi is coming out to be 0.314, provided the number of throws are reasonably large, to say 10,000 or so. So there are many, the spreadsheets also have a number of, and very briefly now I would like to conclude, but I'll just like to share that this was a module which was tried out last year with students of class 12, and I have acknowledged the students of the school. They were taught this topic, matrices and determinants. The approach was through integrating models and applications, and they were allowed to use technology for. So that right from the time when the concept of a matrix was introduced, a certain practical situation was used. So the objective of the study was to see that does the technology tool and does integration of modeling and applications impact students' understanding of the mathematical concepts, or does it help them access higher level concepts, or how do the students perceive paper pencil tasks in such an environment. And so 30 students of grade 12 participated. There were 8 2-hour sessions, and graphic calculators was used for computational work and exploration, and Mathematica was only used when 3D graphing was required. So the topics of, if you are familiar with the curriculum, then typically the topics are types of matrices, matrix operations and so on, and these are the typical textbook problems which require by hand skills. They were given worksheets which required them to explore, so there was a lot of discussion and deliberation, but of course they were given worksheets where their solutions could be recorded. And the applications were taken typically from these 3 areas. Genetics was one, cryptography was the other, and where they had to use matrices for encoding a secret message. So secret messages are sent, and matrix multiplication was used to encrypt the message, and for decoding you had to use the inverse of the matrix. And the Google PageRank algorithm, some kids came up with this and they were excited to know about it, so there was a lot of interesting. So I'm just giving some examples, not possible to go through, it's a very long presentation. So now when the concept of a matrix was introduced as a model for organizing information. This was this one example taken was, suppose there was a tournament and there were 4 teams. These are the arrows indicate the wins. So this network diagram can also be represented in the form of a matrix, a 4 by 4 matrix, where the 1 indicates that this particular player has defeated the other player. So this is an example of an incidence matrix. There were examples taken from genetics, where the students were looking at how genetic traits are transmitted from one generation to the next. And in a particular plant, 2 genes are involved. So capital A for red color, capital small a for white color, and a mix of this would. So if it's capital A would lead to red flowers, capital A small a would lead to pink, and small a would lead to white. Then they had to work out the possible parent pairings, and what would be given a parent pairing, what is the probability that the offspring would have a particular color of the flower. So this was generated, this table. And the important thing was to investigate in the 3rd and 4th session, can they create a model which could predict the genotype distribution of a plant population after any number of generations. And here again they had to do some modeling where equations were written. So A and B and C and are the proportions of the 3 genotypes in the nth generation. Since they depend on the previous generation, some equations were obtained and they were written in a matrix form. But ultimately this kind of an equation was obtained where you could describe the genotype distribution of the nth generation or on the initial distribution. And similar equation to the weather problem, and m raised to the power n was required, and this was important because m is a 3 by 3 matrix and raising it to say the 20th power is not possible to do by hand. Here they use the calculator. But of course then questions came up that what happened, how did people raise these matrices to such powers when there were no calculators? And I was just sharing with Sneha a little while ago that then I said that I can't explain it to you in this class, I'll have to do it in a separate. And then we had to go on to explaining, some of them were interested, not the entire class, on what is, so I had to explain eigenvalues and eigenvectors and what is diagonalization of a matrix. It's typically linear algebra taught in the college level, but that is how you do it by actual method. But the tools allowed the students to raise this matrix to any power, and then they found that steady state distribution was found that it was independent of the initial distribution. This was found by the students themselves, and here very interestingly, if each plant was, so they explored, if each plant was fertilized with a particular genotype, if all the plants are fertilized with red flowers, then eventually all flowers would be red in the subsequent generations. If all plants were fertilized with capital A small a, which is pink flowers, then what would happen? Or then they started doing different permutations and combinations. If each plant was fertilized with a plant of its own genotype only, then what would happen? And the calculations were done using the, and then they plotted some graphs, some of them, using another graphing software. This is Mathematica. But some child came up and saying, I have discovered that there is this free open source graphing, so can I graph it? So that was possible. So all plants, if they fertilize with capital A, eventually the proportion becomes 1. But in this we see an interesting distribution. So those distributions were interpreted in terms of percentages also. So this kind of an exercise, then moving on to solutions of equations. Now in that typically they are taught only one method in class. But using this tool they were actually taught how to reduce a matrix to triangular form and then interpret the solution, whether the nature of solutions of equations. But they were very keen to know that if you have 3 equations in 3 unknowns, what do they represent? Because for 2 equations and 2 unknowns, they know they are linear equations, and what they, in class 10 they do all that. So Mathematica was used to plot the planes representing these equations. Now in the first case it's a unique solution, so I can show you the program, but that would take time. But you can actually move the box around and see that it seems in the first case that they intersect at one single point. Of course I had to say that the planes extend infinitely in all directions, it's just that the box has to be shown, otherwise you can't. In the second case they seem to intersect in a single line. So every point on the line is a solution, so this is the case of infinitely many solutions. Third case, there is no solution, planes are not intersecting anywhere. Then there was another very interesting case where not the plane, the equations was inconsistent, there was no solution, but the planes were not parallel. But they intersected pairwise, but there was no common solution to all three. So there were a lot of visual things which came up, which is not possible to discuss in this without the technology. And finally, I don't have time to get into this, but this was a very exciting exercise where they used this formula. They found it from the internet as the formula for the page, how you rank a particular page on a website. But then I said, okay, then let's use it. And if we have a simple website where there are only 2 pages and each one linked to the other, then we would arrive at some equations using this formula, and if we describe it in using matrices, use matrices to model it, and you would be able to find if there are 2 pages both have a rank of 1. But what if there was a slightly more complex? Now this led to a system of 4 equations in 4 unknowns. That they could not do by hand. So then they used the technology to solve. So the objective was not to compromise on their by hand procedures, but rather to make them use it at points where it was not possible to approach the problem by hand. And then finally the chapter topic ends with inverse of a matrix. Here they were introduced to the Hill cipher method. These were all class 12 students, Hill cipher method. And this is a matrix which you can multiply. So given a message, the message supposes math is fun. So you replace each letter by a number between 0 and 28, because we are using 29 characters, the 26 alphabets and 3 other characters. So, and then you represent this these numbers in a matrix form, and you multiply it with the encoding matrix, which is 1429. You get another matrix. And then you reduce it modulo 29. That means you divide each number by 29 and replace it by its remainder. Those come between 1 and 28, obviously, because you are dividing by 29. And when these are translated into alphabets, math is fun becomes MYSOB something something. And this part of matrix multiplication is they observed. None of them knew the Caesar cipher technique. Each letter, the same letter does not get encrypted to the same letter. So because of matrix multiplication. So therefore it's not so easy to figure out what is the secret message. Now here, so you can't do a frequency analysis and figure out. Here they are supposed to decode, you are supposed to convert the same letters to numbers. There is a fixed substitution table. Multiply by the inverse of the matrix and again reduce them, and you get back to the original message. Now why does this technique work? And what would happen? Now here I specifically chose a matrix whose determinant is 1, so that the inverse would not have any fractional parts. But what if it did? Then it led to a whole discussion. Now these are questions asked by students, I have put it in italics. What happens in the decoding process if encoding matrix had a determinant other than 1? After the class, they won't let me go home. They said, you have to tell us right now. I'm not exaggerating. And it is possible for a person, is it possible for a person other than receiver and senders know the secret key? The encoding matrix is public knowledge, substitution table is public knowledge. But is it, how do they figure it out? So, is it possible for a person to crack the code, that is figure out the encoding matrix? The encoding matrix is known, it's a secret between the sender and the receiver. The substitution table is a public knowledge. Now, if a person figures out the encoding matrix, then they can figure out all messages. So, is it possible for a person just to have the original message and the encrypted message and figure out what is the secret key? So, that led to the discussion of something known as the cracking theorem, which actually exists. Now, the proof of the theorem was not possible, but the application of the theorem was possible to explain that if you have a plain text and a ciphertext matrix, linear simple transformations, the row transformations which convert the transpose of C to I reduce this. So basically you can figure out A. If you know A inverse A is the encoding matrix. If you know A inverse transpose, you know A inverse, and then you know A. So it is possible. So then of course I wanted to calculate the responses, so I gave them a questionnaire and asked questions, and then I worked out some confidence intervals to find. And broadly the students found this module more interesting than their traditional classes. They saw this is from the items that came out. They saw relevance of mathematics to real problems. They agreed that such modules should be a part of the regular curriculum. But they did not want it in the examination. Okay. Applications and models played a key role in understanding concepts but should not be included. That item they clearly said, but it did not have any harmful effect on their manipulative skills. And technology led to a deeper insight through visualization and exploration and helped to trivialize calculations. And these are some of the students' responses. So one of them says, I particularly found the Hill-Cipher method very useful and interesting, including such models based on matrices made the topic very interesting. And last, Mathematica helped us to see the solutions of equations in 3 unknowns. The methods taught in class only helped us to find the solutions, but I could never understand what they looked like until now. So these are basically class 12 students, and I'll just end here. So here there was a mix of graphics calculators and Mathematica. But there was a lot of, they were allowed to mix and move around in the classroom and discuss with each other. And they were using the graphics calculator extensively. Mathematica was more demonstrative in nature. I don't have time for this, so I'll just go to the conclusion. Yeah, I'll just finish. So I just the inclusion of modeling and applications can perhaps help to bring about the shift from content to processes, where we can have processes of estimation, approximation, visualization and reasoning in the classroom. They highlight the relevance of mathematics, but the textbooks will need to be reoriented if you have to include. And the applications should be embedded in the topic, not dealt with separately within the chapters. So they should they would enable the student to understand and apply concepts, learn new mathematical content and practice the mathematics they have learned, and probably blend the procedural and conceptual knowledge. If used properly, maybe technology can help to restore the balance between the need for computational skills and the need for experiencing processes such as exploration and conjecture, and maybe facilitate the process of doing mathematics. But the challenges are many, that it is not, technology that you use has to be cost effective and easy to deploy on a large scale if it has to work on a large scale. Assessment needs to undergo a change because our standard questions cannot be integrated with technology. Major shift in the curriculum will be required. Students will need to be given regular access to the technology. And if you are using something like CAS, then it has a learning curve. I mean, it would be difficult to learn this. There is syntax that the student needs to get used to. And in terms of teacher preparation, there is, of course, a huge challenge. Which tool should we choose? And GeoGebra has become very popular in many schools, and in the state of Kerala has integrated it extensively. But there are other tools as well. Which one should we choose, when and how? That obviously remains to be a challenge. But I think it is worth exploring, and studies have shown in other countries that technology used in various forms have worked. The solutions, they cannot be just lifted and used in our country in the same way, but we need to look at how we can integrate some of these tools in our system. With that, I would like to conclude. Thank you. So if there are any questions, you were asking something that time I could not.
I know x minus 1, x minus 2, x minus 3. I know that it changes at 1 to 1.
So they don't show the graph right away. So what I am saying is that if you are giving a question like this, you expect, one is that they must know how to factorize it. Okay. Now when they are looking at the inequality part, they can take specific values and try to figure it out, but then you want specific intervals. So it's easy to work out, even that is not a very complicated procedural method because it is taught in the class. But when we explain that method, it is not very clear as to why these are the two intervals where it would be positive and the inequality is negative in the other to it. So that immediately gives an instant feedback when you look at the graph. That is all. So in that case, it supports the paper pencil task. The graph supports the paper pencil task and gives the correct visual.
I also think, having taught many years, as you can tell, of school kids, it's not altogether bad to let them see what the end product is. Because they start working from there, they build a bridge across. And it's only the gaming few that don't want to see where they are going, that they are able to build these things. This is an active, good teacher aided growth of some people's logic.
Also, if you gave, say, 5 inequalities and showed them corresponding graphs, and you asked them to make the connection, which would be the intervals where, when will it be greater than 0 satisfied, when will less than 0 be satisfied. So that always creates a confusion in the classroom, I have noted that. So, and cubic inequations are not really dealt with. They used to be, then they were removed from the curriculum. I remember in class 10, then only quadratic inequations were addressed. But the fact is that if you have the tool, you can deal with higher order polynomial functions. So there is always a possibility of accessing higher order concepts, high level concepts. I mean, I don't even say high level because if they are looking at quadratic, why should they not look at cubic? At least up to cubic, they should have familiarity with the function. And the chapter on functions expects the students to know what is y is equal to x cubed, but then it stops there. But there could be cubic functions which are y is equal to x cubed minus 5x squared plus something minus something. How do those coefficients affect the shape of the function? That's also an important learning.
How the student is expected to know means guess the shape of the curve?
They're supposed to know broadly that what a quadratic function, of course, they need to know, and cubic what it looks like roughly. But they don't go beyond x cubed, y is equal to x cubed. But with this, they can explore on their own. They would themselves be feeding in functions and figuring out.
Also, Jimmy, then something that you took for granted was that it will change sign. But I think that it's nice when children actually explore x minus 1 into x minus 2 and why it changes sign. The reason for that to happen. We've only started with the cubic, but what if we combined 2 linear functions and saw that the sign change happened when x changed there? Those kind of things can be shown as we move from later.
Also, there was this other thing I could not show in GeoGebra. For example, in a dynamic geometry environment, a robot, now figure like when you ask the children to construct a square, they follow a certain steps. So you say construct a square of side 5 centimeters. So they will follow, they will draw lines and they will follow a sequence of steps and they will draw the square. But very often it is not clear why those are the steps and why it leads to the construction of the square. In GeoGebra that would become intuitively clear because you would use the circle tool to measure the length of 5 and make a cut on the perpendicular line. So many things would become clear when you are using, that's why dynamic geometry environment is getting a lot of, is attracting a lot of research on how it affects students' understanding of geometrical concepts in particular. Of course, calculus and many other things can be done on it. And it also has spreadsheets. So you can toggle between the numeric, the symbolic and the graphical, the 3 things. And it was very interesting because when the children actually used the GeoGebra to construct the square. Now after constructing the square, for some children when they drag the vertices, the square became a rectangle. And for some children, the square remained a square. So when does it survive the drag test? Now that surviving the drag test tells you about, so the correct construction of the squares are those in which even after changing some of the index, so among some properties remain invariant when you are varying certain things. So by dragging a vertex and changing the side length of the square, but the basic property that all angles are right angles is not changing, all the side lengths are the same, is not changing. So you have to be able to see this invariance in variation. And that is possible in a dynamic geometry environment. And that is leading to very interesting studies have been done on this aspect. Different kind of dragging strategies that students use to explore geometrical ideas. That's something sorry I exceeded the time, but so much material to go.
You said that factorization should be done by hand and then technology can take over. So who makes this decision? And is that a very contentious decision?
No,
What should be done by hand and what can be done by technology? And the second thing is, like if you're a student, if I were a student, I would end up doing everything with technology maybe. I'm very lazy. So is there that danger also?
Yes, so that's why I said you have to ask questions where the student has to think with the technology, because at the end of the day technology is a tool. It will only do what you are telling it. Right? So you need to design questions where it is not a simple calculation, computational type and you give the answer. Some interpretation, some reasoning has to be involved in your part as a person who is using the tool. So now from a curriculum point of view, if the curriculum makers have to decide should GeoGebra be integrated or not, okay, which features of GeoGebra should be allowed in which topics, there will have to be certain fixed decisions which have to be taken if a large scale integration has to be done. But at an individual level, if you are a teacher who takes a lot of initiative and want your students to learn and you want to create your own pedagogy in the class, there is no harm you decide what is the objective of that task or exercise. That needs to be analyzed very deeply. If you think that the students are familiar with you want the students to abstract the idea, when does less than equal to satisfy, taking the case of the equation, or when greater than equal to satisfy, then you have to give them many such examples that you want them to do only using the tool. But when it comes to actually factorizing, then you need to know factorizing as well. So maybe two different kind of questions can be asked. So you have to design questions. That danger is always there. But to circumvent that, you have to create the right kind of tasks. That is a challenge, of course. Because
What is stopping this kind of teaching to mainstream curriculum? Is it the cost factor and
no, yes, of course, there is a cost factor, but there are open source software, so then cost is not an issue. The main issue would be teacher preparation. And how will teachers be oriented to how to ask the right kind of questions? There is no one formula here.
but we have to start somewhere.
Yes, the movement has started actually. As I said, GeoGebra is being translated into so many languages in India itself, and it is being used. But again, this is the slide I stopped where there is content, there is pedagogy, and there is technology. And this term is being again used in the literature, TPC, the technology, pedagogical, content, knowledge. That center point is where the teacher has to be sitting. The teacher has to know all these three things, has to be well conversant with all the three. Sometimes, when you are using a tool, there is an instrumental knowledge involved and then there is a separate mathematical conceptual knowledge involved. So how to draw perpendicular lines in GeoGebra is an instrumental knowledge I need to have. But then how do I integrate it with a useful construction in the classroom is a pedagogical knowledge. So that needs to be addressed and teachers need to be trained, and I'm not too sure if all of it is possible to train at many levels.
So even at basic $40 software, okay, just take two linear equations.
Yes.
Like only some friend of mine has showed that normally means by default what we do is we substitute by terms of x and put in the second equation and do it. Right? Only later at some other stage someone had to tell me that just draw the lines on a graph, see where it takes. So this is a very basic thing that any teacher can do in the classroom, right? But in spite of this, at least when I was in school, I don't think that this was a way which was shown as solutions.
But when a point has an intersection of two lines, yeah.
A lot of these principles
Yes.
is just doing it in graphs.
Yeah.
Right? Even if the technology part is not there, I think as concepts, someone has to understand. So, is there any movement on that front? Means if technology has caused problems, all these problems, just taking on those terms, like trying and drawing on this thing and so on. Is there any?
People who are using teachers who use technology would probably design many tasks like this. Linear equations is a very common thing now. If you go Google search on GeoGebra activities, you get many linear equation based activities on GeoGebra. So it is, of course, once the technology tools started coming in, a shift did happen waiting for those teachers who are using the technology. But the point is that my question is a little different, that at least the two linear equations you can put on a graph paper. So at some, you may want the student to also be able to plot the points and figure out. But once they've done two exercises, there is no need to go on repeatedly telling them graph it on graph paper. They can use the tool. But for three unknowns and three equations, visualization is required. It is difficult, it is impossible to imagine three planes meeting at a point, unless you show something there. So there, the technology I think has a greater power. But your question is also right. Yes, there have been initiatives in that direction, but it is a very slow process. It is not something which by one set of training modules will get enhanced or will suddenly start getting implemented.
It is the tail that it's the tail that wags the dog. Until you change CBSE and ICSE and places like that, you as a teacher, all of this is what you need in the 9th and 10th grade, or 11th and 12th grade. Both these feed into a high stakes exam. And if you make 94 on 100, you fail because you can't get into the thing of your choice. So you spend all your time just fine-tuning students to get the last 5 marks to make them. The moment we drop that kind of dependence on a test, I think we can teach incredibly well. But we don't have the time. We are really Pavlov's, become like Pavlov's living puppy dogs.
Also, I'd like to share this that there's a lot of research going on the transition from conjecture to proof in geometry. And GeoGebra, this is a GeoGebra figure. And this was with grade 9 students had done this. When they found the centers of a triangle like circumcenter, orthocenter, and all using paper folding. And then they figured out that O is the circumcenter, G is the centroid, and H is the collinear and Euler's line. It's a very common activity now. After GeoGebra came in, this became a very well explored and common activity. But here I was trying to get them to prove the collinearity of the 3 points, actually. Now in the actual writing the formal proof, GeoGebra did not directly play a role, it was not used. But when they drag, this is a static image, but when they drag vertex A, they saw that there are these 2 triangles. So what was done is O was constructed, then G was constructed. Then I said whatever is OG, that length, you extend it to twice its, and H was a point. It is not known that H is the orthocenter. So I said we know O is the circumcenter, G is the centroid, but we need to prove that H is the orthocenter. So I need to prove that AH is perpendicular to BC. How do I do that? So then 2 triangles emerged. They were class 9 students, they knew congruency of triangles, but they did not know similarity. But they used similarity here. So the idea of similarity was discussed, not very rigorously, but they used the SAS condition of congruency. They extrapolated it to sort of similarity, and then they said that if these 2 triangles are similar, then those angles become equal, and then AH becomes perpendicular to BC because AH becomes parallel to OD, and it is already known that OD is perpendicular to BC. This is a perpendicular bisector. I mean, this was a long study, which was a long time. It took about 2 hours for this particular proof to emerge. But they themselves, people worry that if you give technology, students will stop thinking and they not want to do. But these students were asking, they were not satisfied only when GeoGebra was giving certain, they were exploring. They wanted to understand how to logically argue. Maybe they were a little lazy about writing the proof on paper, but they wanted to logically argue. What were the arguments that would lead to actually showing that yes, AH is perpendicular to this? So these kind of discussions, I guess, if we restrict the number of topics in the curriculum and we embed technology properly in those, then it would be feasible to. Otherwise, in the present breadth of the curriculum, it is not. Also, it is not necessary or required to have technology in each and every topic. Maybe a chunk of concepts and problems can be identified, topics can be identified where it is more required.
One more factor, it's an observation, but since I keep always saying this, like all tools that you say are just tools. Means none of them have the spoon feeding thing. When we say technology in math, the first thing that we should only say is clear as one of those things. increase the interest factor of the particular subject. If you don't try and there is, I don't think that we do a lot more work in giving tools such as this. They're just basic tools. As such, they can't do anything unless someone takes it and starts using it for something. So there also is observed that all tools and tools have to do with that.
You are the one who has to use it in the appropriate way. It can go wrong, the explorations can go, it can be totally futile if the right kind of activity is not designed. But there is tremendous scope in the right kind of technology.
Yeah, one more question. That may be the last question. So how do you look at this in applying this in a resource-constrained environment, which is a reality in the Indian context? Because even if you talk about bringing a change in the curriculum, again there is a big question of the constraint which we have. So, and this all needs a pretty good computer. So
My thought in that would be that NCF says that you include modeling and applications in the curriculum. So if it is possible to have a separate topic, or maybe in certain chapters, there could be certain explorations which are made optional, or there could be a portion of the maybe applications which are sort of optional, which some people may choose to do, or there may be certain chapters in the curriculum which are optional topics. But at least give the chance to those people who have the access to technology, and it can at least start that way. But you have to identify one tool. We can't have a range of tools and say, although I would like to say that in Delhi University, when they revamped the mathematics undergraduate curriculum, they are saying that you have to use some computer algebra system to do the practical aspect. Every theory has a practicals now in maths. And practicals आपको करना है तो आप कोई भी computer algebra system use कर सकते हैं. Use Mathematica, use MATLAB, use open source. So one could be that way. But in school system, I don't think that will work. You have to tell people that use this particular tool. So there could be some explorations and some things based, for example, in the chapter on functions, can be totally explored through GeoGebra. So certain topics, at least one could begin by integrating the technology, one particular technology, using in few chapters. It could start that way. And slowly modeling mathematical modeling is an appendix chapter. It is never touched.
And not in the exam.
And not in the exam. Make it relevant, bring in different kind of examples, some like the topics which I showed and others also there, and make it a chapter in the mainstream of the textbook, not as an appendix. Appendix never gets looked at. So that might be
What Mujahid is saying is, what if they don't even have a computer or even electricity? Is that what you're saying?
that goes, yeah, touches that question.
Go have a computer or electricity then, of course.
Because that is the reality we are facing.
I mean that has to be made available. But perhaps even one computer in a classroom would suffice. At least the student will be able to, teacher will be able to demonstrate certain things. And
Paper folding is a great substitute.
yes.
Algebra tiles are very good. I don't know if you've seen algebra tiles.
No.
They are plastic tiles that have a square and slim rectangles and tiny squares. It's so you can actually show that you can pile it up like this, make it into a square or rectangle, and
Item
say
of factorization.
length
Algebra
times
tiles.
times.
Yes.
So these sort of hands-on activities for lower classes is fine. For higher classes, it's a little bit.
See, because algebra tiles are very useful for quadratic, but for cubic you can't show.
You
have
can't.
to make the cubes then.
Unless you make it into solid cubes,
Yes. And
which will be widely interesting actually.
that up to cubes, then after that.
After that you can. After
So-
that we don't hassle with it because the college is making.
But if you have the tool, then you can think about that as well.
Actually, in physics we do vectors and unit vectors and so on.
Yes, exactly.
And I've had kids constructing a cube in a class and having them crawl through and make a vector and see how the vector has a unit vector on the x-axis and the y-axis and the z-axis and so on. and they actually do take these lengths, they do add it up, they do, and they come up with amazing stuff. And they move in the process. And really, that is, yeah, that's the important thing, because if they're kinesthetically involved, then it somehow sticks. And you never have to teach that to them again.
In the beta version now of GeoGebra, you can actually create a cube and show these vectors moving around and all. So, all I'm trying to say is that if there is technology, I mean everybody can, if that tool can be made accessible, then the student has access to the mathematics, and all students, the mathematics can be made accessible to all the students. Right now that is not happening. Even with procedural methods, what percentage of an average class is actually being able to completely understand, able to understand and do those procedures? Especially at the 11, 12 level, you see many topics which are quite common. They just by rote they are just doing it, especially in the CBSE. Right? By rote they are simply applying the methods, but there is no insight.
What is unfortunate that even the entrance tests are based on these tricks. Yes. Just,
Thank you so much for being patient.